Welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories, where chilling mysteries meet soothing whispers. I'm your host, Kelly, and tonight I'm going to guide you through a real-life puzzle, unraveling the threads of intrigue and suspense as you snuggle beneath your blankets. Designed for true crime aficionados with a penchant for relaxation, each episode promises a blend of curious storytelling and calm narration. So dim the lights, take a deep breath, and allow yourself to drift into a restful state as we explore the darkest corners of history together. Get cozy for the story of D.B. Cooper. Not all enthralling true crime tales involve gruesome acts or sinister plots. Some captivate the imagination by weaving threads of mystery and intrigue with characters who vanish into the annals of history without a trace. Such is the case with D.B. Cooper, an enduring mystery that has puzzled experts and amateurs alike for decades. Let's go back to the fateful day. On November 24th, 1971, an unremarkable man who introduced himself as Dan Cooper approached the Northwest Orient Airlines counter at Portland International Airport. He purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle, Washington, paying in cash, a decision that would forever embroil him in one of the most perplexing unsolved cases in the FBI's extensive archives. Dan Cooper was an ordinary man with an extraordinary plan. Mistakenly dubbed as D.B. Cooper due to a media blunder, he seemed the epitome of an average businessman in his mid-40s. Clad in a suit, accented with a black tie and a crisp white shirt, he boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727, without attracting any undue attention. Once seated, he ordered a bourbon and soda, blending seamlessly with his fellow travelers. Yet, beneath this veneer of normalcy lay the blueprint for a daring and audacious act that would soon capture the world's attention. Cooper's demeanor was calm and composed as he settled into his seat. His unassuming behavior persisted as the aircraft taxied and took off, marking the beginning of a flight that would become infamous for its unexpected turn. What followed was a meticulously planned heist, executed with precision and leaving law enforcement agencies grappling with unanswered questions, and an elusive perpetrator who vanished as mysteriously as he appeared. Thus began the legend of D.B. Cooper, a story not defined by bloodshed, but by sheer audacity and an enigmatic escape that continues to challenge investigators and intrigue true crime aficionados to this very day. The mystery endures, inviting us to peer into the shadows of history and ponder the identity and fate of a man who dared to defy gravity and the law. It was a routine afternoon on November 24th, 1971, aboard Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305. Business travelers and holidaymakers settled in for what they expected to be an ordinary flight. Among them was Dan Cooper, a calm and composed man, the picture of a typical businessman awaiting takeoff. But as the plane cruised through the skies, his demeanor took on a more sinister edge. Shortly after 3 p.m., Cooper caught the attention of a flight attendant, urging her to come closer. He discreetly slipped her a note, which she initially tucked away without reading, assuming it was just a flirtatious gesture. But Cooper's voice, steady and cold, insisted that she read it immediately. She unfolded the paper to find a chilling message. He had a bomb in his briefcase. Without raising alarm, the flight attendant sat beside him as he had asked. Cooper quietly opened his attaché case, revealing a jumbled array of wires and red sticks, hinting at the deadly potential it contained. The stark contrast between his understated manner and the gravity of his threat left no room for doubt. He dictated his demands for the captain, a staggering $200,000 in cash, equivalent to nearly $1.5 million today, and 4 parachutes. His instructions were clear, and she hurried to the cockpit, the weight of his words spurring her every step. Seattle-Tacoma International Airport was bathed in a soft glow. It was here that Dan Cooper's meticulously crafted plan began to unfold. With an unnerving calm, he orchestrated the release of 36 passengers, each now free from the ordeal that had begun hours earlier. Yet, for the crew remaining on board, their harrowing experience was only just beginning. With the ransom money secured and parachutes carefully stowed, Cooper tightened his grip on the airliner, transforming it into an airborne fortress. His next demand? A flight bound for Mexico City with a necessary refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. The remaining crew, caught up in this unfolding drama, had no choice but to comply with their captor's commands. In what would soon become an indelible chapter in aviation history, Cooper's audacious plot was on the brink of climax. His methodical actions and steely demeanor would soon propel him into history. With its engines roaring to life, the aircraft once again ascended into the night sky. Somewhere over the shadowy expanses of southwestern Washington, Cooper made his daring move. Just over 30 minutes into the flight, he lowered the stairs of the plane and, with the ransom money strapped to his body, leapt into the inky abyss. A night cloaked in rain and darkness. The pilots, following protocol, landed the aircraft safely, but Cooper had vanished without a trace. His disappearance between Mount Rainier and northern Portland created an instant legend. The hijacker had ordered the pilot to open the aircraft's rear door before making his escape, leaving behind a story that would intrigue and baffle for decades. Yet, as Special Agent Larry Carr noted in a 2007 case update, no experienced parachutist would have jumped in the pitch-black night, in the rain, with a 200-mile-an-hour wind in his face, wearing loafers and just a trench coat. It was simply too risky. Cooper's choice to jump with a reserve chute, one that was sewn shut and only meant for training, only added to the mystery, suggesting a deadly oversight or sheer desperation. Thus, an audacious tale of high-stakes intrigue and an untraceable escape was born, forever etching Dan Cooper into the folklore of true crime. In the immediate chaos that followed the infamous skyjacking, the FBI sprang into action with a sweeping investigation known as Operation Norjack, short for Northwest Hijacking. This high-stakes operation was launched even before the jetliner touched down, as agents scrambled to piece together one of aviation history's most perplexing mysteries. The Bureau left no stone unturned. They carefully combed over every inch of the aircraft, hoping to uncover any detail that might lead them closer to the notorious hijacker known as D.B. Cooper. Norjack was not just an operation, it was a relentless pursuit of the truth. Over the years, agents conducted exhaustive interviews with hundreds of individuals and chased down leads from coast to coast. The team's dedication was unwavering as they meticulously analyzed every shred of evidence. Their determination led to narrowing a daunting list of over 800 suspects down to just 24 individuals. Yet, despite the intensity of their efforts and the promising leads that emerged, the man behind the alias of D.B. Cooper remained as shadowy and enigmatic as the night he vanished. His true identity and what ultimately became of him continued to elude some of the nation's sharpest minds. Among the myriad of suspects, Richard Floyd McCoy often stands out due to his arrest for a remarkably similar crime. Less than 5 months after D.B. Cooper's audacious hijacking and parachute escape, McCoy executed a comparable heist, parachuting from a plane with ransom in hand. For a time, investigators considered him a prime suspect. Discrepancies in physical descriptions and other critical details eventually led authorities to rule him out as the elusive Cooper. The question of whether Cooper survived his daring leap into the unknown has spawned endless speculation and theories. Evidence suggests he may not have been a seasoned skydiver, as the parachute he used was non-steerable, making navigation nearly impossible. Furthermore, his attire, a business suit, and regular shoes, was ill-suited for a perilous jump into the wilderness on a cold, wet November evening. November 24th, 1971 was a typical night for the Pacific Northwest, characterized by chilling weather and relentless rain. Cooper's jump occurred sometime after 8 p.m., plunging him into darkness shrouded by dense cloud cover at 5,000 feet. His likely landing spot lay in the rugged terrain of southwestern Washington, a region battered by an ongoing storm of rain and snow. While the exact elevation of Cooper's landing site remains unknown, weather data offers chilling insights. At Stampede Pass, situated about 100 to 150 miles north, steady snowfall blanketed the landscape, accumulating 27 inches by November 29th. The temperatures lingered in the frigid upper 20s to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, painting a grim picture of Cooper's chance for survival. The FBI's focus centered on the area around Lake Merwin, where terrain elevations varied from 2,000 to 2,500 feet. Yet, if the wind carried him eastward, Cooper faced even higher elevations. Reports from Portland confirmed that the heavy precipitation extended into southern Washington and northern Oregon, ensuring that Cooper would have encountered either a snowstorm or torrential rain, depending on his final resting place. In the inhospitable wilderness, Cooper was left with little more than his suit and shoes, hardly the equipment needed for survival in such harsh conditions. With no provisions for warmth, fire, or shelter, he would have been soaked from the jump, exposed to relentless rain or snow, and struggling against the unforgiving elements. If he managed to survive and vanish without a trace, it would not only be one of the greatest heists in history, but also an extraordinary survival story. However, if the odds were against him, his tale serves as a cautionary reminder of nature's unpredictability, emphasizing the importance of preparation and awareness before venturing out into the unknown. A significant clue emerged in 1980 when a young boy named Brian Ingram made a startling discovery. While digging a fire pit in the sandy banks of the Columbia River at Tennabar, north of Portland, Ingram unearthed 3 bundles of decaying $20 bills. The total amount was $5,800, and the serial numbers matched the ransom money, marking the first evidence linked to Cooper since his disappearance. The discovery ignited fresh curiosity and debate among Cooper hunters who speculated on how the money arrived at the riverbank. Theories abounded, adding fuel to the legend of D.B. Cooper and ensuring that this tale endures in true crime lore. What was D.B. Cooper's fate? The mystery of D.B. Cooper has sparked debates worldwide. Forums and online communities buzz with theories about the fate of the elusive hijacker, driven by a few intriguing questions that remain unanswered to this day. Several theories have been dissected by the group Citizen Sleuths, a dedicated team of online researchers with backgrounds in crime investigations. One of the most hotly debated topics is whether Cooper could have survived his dramatic leap from the plane. Experts are divided. Some seasoned skydivers suggest that an amateur would not have survived such a daring jump, whereas others claim that with just a handful of practice jumps, survival was plausible. The harsh weather conditions that night only add to the uncertainty. Despite thorough searches, no body or parachute has ever been discovered, leaving Cooper's fate shrouded in mystery. Determining Cooper's level of expertise in skydiving presents its own set of puzzles. His request for front and back parachutes hints at inexperience, yet his refusal of parachute instructions suggests confidence and familiarity. The choice of a non-steerable military parachute raises more questions than answers. Was it a novice error or a calculated decision due to its ability to endure high-speed jumps? While he donned the parachute with apparent proficiency, his selection of a non-functional reserve chute seems to contradict this. This blend of seemingly opposing actions keeps investigators guessing about his true capabilities. As previously mentioned, in 1980, a young boy stumbled upon a bundle of decaying bills along the Columbia River's Tennebar, an unexpected clue in an otherwise cold case. This discovery is puzzling given that it's located 20 miles from the theorized drop zone near Ariel, Washington. Several theories attempt to explain this mystery. The Washougal washdown theory posits that the money traveled through smaller rivers into the Columbia. Alternatively, some speculate that the FBI's flight path was just incorrect, allowing Cooper to land directly at Tennebar and hide the money himself. There's also the possibility that Cooper, or an accomplice, intentionally buried the money to mislead authorities. Geologist Dr. Leonard Palmer's analysis suggested the cash settled into newly deposited dredge sand, indicating it may have traveled from upstream, though the intact rubber bands challenge this timeline. How 3 bundles of cash remained together for years only to be uncovered remains a point of intrigue. Theories range from the bundles being protected by a bank bag, which later disintegrated, to Cooper losing the money upon his landing. Some even suggest a third party could have buried it there for reasons unknown. The condition of the recovered money, with edges worn and holes present, prompts questions about its time spent in the elements. Could roots, river currents, or dredging have contributed to its deterioration? The official flight path, as mapped in the FBI archives, lacks critical details such as its creator and date. Speculation suggests it was derived from radar data and flight recorder analysis. However, this path does not align with Tennebar or the Washougal area. The discovery at Tennebar forces a reconsideration of the flight path, suggesting Cooper may have jumped or the plane flew over a different trajectory than initially believed. Cooper's recognition of Tacoma from the air suggests familiarity with the region, yet it raises suspicions about his origins. Some speculate he was a local. However, the unique request for negotiable American currency implies he might have been an outsider unfamiliar with American vernacular. Despite countless investigations and potential leads, none of the current suspects fit the D.B. Cooper profile convincingly. Experts surmise Cooper might have been employed in fields related to metalworking or chemical processing, but doubt lingers over whether any of the FBI's suspects are the real hijacker. The case of D.B. Cooper is one of those rare enigmas that has captivated both seasoned law enforcement and amateur sleuths for decades. Despite exhaustive investigations by the FBI and countless theories spun by enthusiasts around the globe, the case remains unsolved. D.B. Cooper's daring leap from the aircraft into the dense forests of southwestern Washington has left an indelible mark on the true crime world. Each attempt to uncover the truth only adds layers of complexity to the narrative, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Did Cooper survive that perilous jump into the rugged wilderness? Is he living somewhere under a new identity, having successfully eluded capture with his ill-gotten gains? Or did he meet a different fate, swallowed by the vast and unforgiving terrain below? The allure of D.B. Cooper's story lies not only in its mystery, but also in its tantalizing what-ifs. In a case devoid of violence or injury, many find themselves secretly rooting for the enigmatic hijacker. The notion that Cooper might have managed to start anew, free from the constraints of his former life, taps into a universal yearning for reinvention. Who hasn't dreamed of parachuting into a fresh beginning, unburdened by the past? This idea, the possibility of successful escape and reinvention, is perhaps why the legend of D.B. Cooper refuses to fade. It challenges our notions of justice and law, urging us to contemplate the thin line between crime and adventure. While the truth about D.B. Cooper remains elusive, the mystery continues to beckon us, whispering its unanswered questions and daring us to solve this riddle. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Crime Sleep Stories. Until next time, good night, sleep tight, and be sure to lock your doors every night. Bye-bye. Hello and welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories. Get comfortable because tonight you're going to hear a mysterious true crime tale that still remains unsolved to this day. But first, I wanted to mention that you can support the show by joining our Patreon. Just go to the link in the show notes to do that. And be sure to follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at True Crime Sleep Stories. All the information is in the show notes. You can just click on the link to go there. Now, let's get into your true crime sleep story. The Great Alcatraz Escape of 1962. During its prime, Alcatraz stood as humanity's most impenetrable fortress, an island shrouded in fog and surrounded by the icy, treacherous waters of the San Francisco Bay. Known ominously as the Rock, it had been a site for confinement since the Civil War. Yet, it was in 1934, amid a fierce crackdown on crime, that Alcatraz was transformed into an epitome of maximum security, a place where hope was meant to be extinguished. The prison was home to infamous criminals like Al Capone and George Machine Gun Kelly, names synonymous with danger and daring escapes. Even unique figures like the enigmatic Birdman of Alcatraz called this place home. The 1930s saw Alcatraz evolve into a veritable labyrinth of despair encircled by the frigid, turbulent waters of the Pacific Ocean. The redesign boasted iron bars forged straight from hell, guard towers that loomed like specters, and regulations so stringent that a dozen checks were performed daily on each inmate. Escape was deemed impossible. But legends are born from the impossible. Frank Morris arrived at Alcatraz in January 1960, his legacy marked by bank robberies, burglaries, and multiple thwarted escape attempts. By the end of that same year, John Anglin joined him, soon followed by his brother, Clarence, in early 1961. The three, already acquainted from past incarcerations, were united by more than just iron bars. In adjacent cells, they whispered plans shrouded in darkness. Morris, whose sharp intellect was both a gift and a curse, orchestrated the grand design. They found an unlikely ally in Alan West, an inmate whose fate would be irrevocably tied to their audacious enterprise. The morning of June 12, 1962, began like any other, but beneath the surface, the island was a cauldron of secrets and tension. During the early morning bed check, guards discovered a chilling void. 3 inmates, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, and Frank Morris, had vanished into thin air. In their place lay ghastly, meticulously crafted dummy heads, sculpted from plaster, Painted in flesh tones and adorned with real human hair, these decoys had deceived the night guards. Panic spread like wildfire. The prison was locked down, and an exhaustive search commenced. The FBI was roped in immediately, their agents descending upon the island like hounds on a scent. Coordinating with local branches, they unearthed records of the escapees' past attempts. Conversations with relatives yielded fragments of identification records, while boat operators around the bay were alerted to any debris. Days later, a breakthrough. A packet of letters sealed in rubber linked to the fugitives surfaced. Wood fragments, paddle-like in shape, and pieces of a rubber inner tube followed. A homemade life vest washed ashore on Cronkite Beach. Yet, the bay held its secrets tightly, offering no further clues. The ensuing days saw the FBI, the Coast Guard, and prison authorities piecing together an escape plan that bordered on genius. Their informant was Alan West, who was left behind by fate and a stubborn ventilator grill, and he began to sing like a canary. The plot had been hatched the previous December, sparked by the discovery of old saw blades. Crude tools, including a homemade drill fashioned from a broken vacuum cleaner motor, were employed. They meticulously drilled holes around the air vents, loosening them until entire sections of wall could be removed. The holes were hidden behind suitcases and cardboard. Behind their cells lay an unguarded utility corridor, a shadowy passage to freedom. Here they established a secret workshop atop the cell block, using stolen and donated materials to craft their escape tools. Over 50 raincoats were transformed into life preservers and a 6-by-14-foot rubber raft, seams stitched and vulcanized by the prison's steam pipes. Wooden paddles were carved, and a musical instrument was repurposed to inflate the raft. Scaling the 30-foot ceiling was their final hurdle. Utilizing a network of pipes, they reached the ventilator at the top, prying it open and securing it with a fake bolt made from a bar of soap. The night of June 11th was their moment of truth. The air was thick with anticipation as they prepared to breach their prison. West, thwarted by his ventilator grill, was left behind. The remaining trio entered the corridor, gathered their equipment, and ascended through the ventilator to the prison roof. From there, they descended the bakery smokestack, scaled the fence, and slipped into the night, heading towards the northeast shore. Their raft awaited, a fragile vessel against the might of the bay. And then, the trail went cold. Did they conquer the bay, reaching Angel Island and crossing Raccoon Strait to Marin County? Or were they swallowed by nature's fury? Speculation abounded. The FBI's investigation, however, concluded otherwise. And here's why. Though young swimmers had managed the over-mile-long swim from Alcatraz to Angel Island, the fierce currents and freezing waters made survival highly unlikely. An informant claimed the fugitives intended to steal clothes and a car, but no such thefts were reported. If they had aid, the FBI found no trace. Their families lacked the means for substantial support. Over all of these years, no credible evidence has ever surfaced to suggest that the men were alive either domestically or abroad. On December 31st, 1979, the FBI closed the case, passing it to the U.S. Marshals Service. To this day, the fate of John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, and Frank Morris remains enshrouded in mystery, a testament to the indomitable human spirit and the allure of the impossible. What do you think happened to the 1962 escapees of Alcatraz Island? Do you think they perished in the frigid waters of the Pacific Ocean? Or do you think they made it to the other side and started a new life? Thank you for listening to this episode of True Crime Sleep Stories. Hopefully you are sound asleep right now, but if not, please like and subscribe to this podcast and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps the show. You can follow us on all the social media at True Crime Sleep Stories, and you can find the links in the show notes. Until next time, good night, sleep tight, and don't let the monsters bite. Welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories. It's time to relax, get comfortable, and let me lull you to sleep with a truly terrifying tale of murder and mayhem. Tonight's bedtime story is that of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia. Elizabeth Short was an American woman found murdered in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, California on January 15, 1947. Her case became highly publicized owing to the gruesome nature of the crime, which included the mutilation of her corpse, which was bisected at the waist. A native of Boston, Short spent her early life in New England and Florida before relocating to California, where her father lived. It's commonly held that she was an aspiring actress, although she had no known acting credits or jobs during her time in Los Angeles. She would acquire the nickname of the Black Dahlia posthumously, as newspapers of the period often nicknamed particularly lurid crimes. The term may have originated from a film noir murder mystery, The Blue Dahlia. After the discovery of her body, the Los Angeles Police Department began an extensive investigation that produced over 150 suspects, but yielded no arrests. Short's unsolved murder and the details surrounding it have had a lasting cultural intrigue, generating various theories and public speculation. Her life and death have been the basis of numerous books and films, and her murder is frequently cited as one of the most famous unsolved murders in U.S. history, as well as one of the oldest unsolved cases in Los Angeles County. It has likewise been credited by historians as one of the first major crimes in post-war America to capture national attention. Prior to her murder on January 9, 1947, Short returned to her home in Los Angeles after a brief trip to San Diego with Robert Red Manley, a 25-year-old married salesman that she had been dating. Manley stated that he dropped Short off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles and that Short was to meet her sister, who was arriving from Boston that afternoon. By some accounts, staff of the Biltmore recalled having seen Short using the lobby telephone. Shortly after, she was allegedly seen by patrons of the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge at 754 South Olive Street, approximately 3/8 of a mile away from the Biltmore. On the morning of January 15th, 1947, Short's naked body, severed in 2 pieces, was found in a vacant lot on the west side of South Norton Avenue, midway between Coliseum Street and West 39th Street in the neighborhood of Leimert Park. At the time, Leimert Park was largely undeveloped. Short's severely mutilated body was completely severed at the waist and drained of blood, leaving her skin a pallid white. Medical examiners determined that she had been dead for around 10 hours prior to the discovery, leaving her time of death either sometime during the evening of January 14th or the early morning hours of January 15th. The body had apparently been washed by the killer. Short's face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating an effect known as the Glasgow smile. She had several cuts on her thigh and breasts where entire portions of flesh had been sliced away. The lower half of her body was positioned a foot away from the upper, and her intestines had been tucked neatly beneath her buttocks. The corpse had been posed with her hands over her head, her elbows bent at right angles, and her legs spread apart. Los Angeles Herald-Express reporter Aggie Underwood was among the first to arrive and took several photos of the corpse and the crime scene. Near the body, detectives located a heel print on the ground amid the tire tracks, and a cement sack containing watery blood was also found nearby. An autopsy of Short's body was performed on January 16, 1947 by Frederick Newbar, the Los Angeles County coroner. Newbar's autopsy report stated that Short was 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 115 pounds. She had light blue eyes, brown hair, and badly decayed teeth. There were ligature marks on her ankles, wrists, and neck, and an irregular laceration with superficial tissue loss on her right breast. Newbar also noted superficial lacerations on the right forearm, left upper arm, and the lower left side of the chest. The body had been cut completely in half by a technique taught in the 1930s called a hemicorporectomy. The lower half of her body had been removed by transecting the lumbar spine between the second and third lumbar vertebrae, thus severing the intestine at the duodenum. Newbar's report noted very little ecchymosis, or bruising, along the incision line, suggesting it had been performed after death. Another gaping laceration, measuring over 4 inches long, ran longitudinally from the umbilicus to the suprapubic region. The lacerations on each side of the face, which extended from the corners of the lips, were measured at 3 inches on the right side of the face and 2.5 inches on the left. The skull was not fractured, but there was bruising noted at the front and the right side of her scalp, with a small amount of bleeding in the subarachnoid space on the right side, consistent with blows to the head. The cause of death was determined to be hemorrhaging from the lacerations to her face and the shock from the blows to the head and the face. Samples were taken from her body, testing for the presence of sperm, but the results came back negative. Short was identified after her fingerprints were sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigations. Her fingerprints were on file from her 1943 arrest. Immediately following Short's identification, reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner contacted her mother, Phoebe Short, in Boston, and told her that her daughter had won a beauty contest. It was only after prying as much personal information as they could from Phoebe that the reporters revealed that her daughter had actually been murdered. The Examiner also offered to pay Phoebe's airfare and accommodations if she would travel to Los Angeles to help them with the police investigation. That was yet another ploy, since the newspaper kept her away from the police and other reporters to protect its scoop. The Examiner and another Hearst newspaper, the Herald-Express, later sensationalized the case, with one Examiner article describing the black tailored suit Short was last seen wearing as a tight skirt and a sheer blouse. The media nicknamed her the Black Dahlia and described her as an adventuress who prowled Hollywood Boulevard. Additional newspaper reports, such as one published in the Los Angeles Times on January 17th, deemed the murder a sex fiend slaying. The notoriety of Short's murder has spurred a large number of confessions over the years, most of which have been deemed false. During the initial investigation into her murder, police received a total of 60 confessions, most made by men. Since that time, over 500 people have confessed to the crime, some of whom had not even been born at the time of her death. Sergeant John St. John, a detective who worked the case until his retirement, stated,
"It's amazing how many people offer up a relative as the killer."
Several crime authors, as well as police detective Peter Merylo, have suspected a link between the Short murder and the Cleveland torso murders, which took place in Cleveland, Ohio between 1934 and 1938. As part of their investigation into other murders that took place before and after the Short killing, the original LAPD investigators studied the torso murders in 1947, but later discounted any connection between the two cases. Numerous details regarding Short's personal life and death have been points of public dispute. The eager involvement of both the public and the press in solving her murder have been credited as factors that have complicated the investigation significantly, resulting in a complex, sometimes inconsistent narrative of events. A number of people, none of whom knew Short, contacted police and the newspapers and claimed to have seen her during her so-called missing week, between her January 9th disappearance and the discovery of her body on January 15th. Police and DA investigators ruled out each alleged sighting. In some cases, those interviewed were identifying other women whom they had mistaken for Short. Short's whereabouts in the days leading up to her murder and the discovery of her body are unknown. According to newspaper reports shortly after the murder, Short received the nickname Black Dahlia from staff and patrons at a Long Beach drugstore in mid-1946 as wordplay on the film The Blue Dahlia from 1946. Other popularly circulated rumors claim that the media crafted the name because Short adorned her jet black hair with dahlias. According to the FBI official website, she received the first part of the nickname from the press for her rumored penchant for sheer black clothing. Although some of her acquaintances and several other journalists described Short as a prostitute or call girl during her time in Los Angeles, according to Harnish, the contemporaneous grand jury proved that there was no existing evidence that she was ever a sex worker. Short is interned at the Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, California. After her younger sister, Elnora, had grown up and married, their mother, Phoebe, moved to Oakland to be near her daughter's grave. She finally returned to the East Coast in the 1970s, where she lived into her 90s and died in 1992. On February 2, 1947, just 2 weeks after Short's murder, Republican State Assemblyman C. Don Field was prompted by the case to introduce a bill calling for the formation of a sex offender registry. The state of California would become the first U.S. state to make the registration of sex offenders mandatory. Short's murder has been described as one of the most brutal and culturally enduring crimes in American history. Time magazine listed it as one of the most infamous cases in the world. Short's life and death have been the basis of numerous books, television shows, and films, both fictionalized and nonfiction. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Crime Sleep Stories. Until next time, good night, sleep tight, and don't let the monsters bite. Wisconsin is a wonderful state, full of natural beauty, dotted with lakes, forests, and wildlife. It's known as America's Dairyland, which is one big reason why their cheese is just so good. The state also has some of the best beer in the U.S., with Miller Brewing right there in Wisconsin. But Wisconsin is also known for its wonderful people, and there are so many cute, quaint little towns with friendly people welcoming you in. We don't know how many people lived in Doveland, Wisconsin, or if it actually really ever even existed at all, because Doveland, Wisconsin is one of America's biggest little mysteries. Was Doveland part of a government project gone wrong? Is it another instance of the Mandela effect at work? Was the town sucked into a black hole? Or are people just misremembering? We'll discuss all the interesting theories coming right up. Doveland was a small town in Wisconsin that many people absolutely insist existed up until the early 1990s, and then it and all the people who lived in it just up and vanished. You won't find Doveland, Wisconsin on any maps or in any books. The only evidence that Doveland was ever really a place comes in the form of stories of people who had been there or lived nearby, or people who have the random Doveland mug or Doveland t-shirt. There's also one photograph of 3 people, 1 man and 2 women, sitting at a table of what sources say is a Doveland restaurant. Is it really in Doveland, though, or are people just trying to perpetuate a myth? One theory is that Doveland was like many other small towns in America, that due to a failing economy, the people of Doveland just slowly left the area, moving to bigger towns with more opportunities, and then the town just faded out of memory. Another explanation for the Doveland disappearance is damming. Damming has actually destroyed many small Wisconsin towns. Was Doveland one of them? There were many hydroelectric projects taking place in the late 19th century in Wisconsin. The town of Werner, Wisconsin is an example of what could have happened to Doveland. Werner was intentionally flooded in the 1920s by the Wisconsin River Power Company to form what's now Castle Rock Lake. So maybe the town was washed away, and all the evidence of it ever existing was washed away with it. Others claim that the town was related to a government project called Project Sanguine. The project's purpose was to better communicate with deep-sea submarines worldwide because radio waves could not travel through water. The solution was to bury huge cables under approximately 41% of the state of Wisconsin, thereby turning the state into the largest radio antenna in the world. U.S. Navy officials crafted the project in the 1960s, highly motivated by pressures from the Cold War and the desire to send important intel to nuclear-powered subs that stayed submerged for months at a time. The state-sized antenna would allow the Navy to transmit extremely low frequency, or ELF, waves capable of penetrating water and reach the subs. The project never came to fruition due to the immense cost and the environmental disturbance it would require. The Navy instead opted for the smaller version, Project ELF, which was built in Wisconsin and Michigan's Upper Peninsula and operated between 1989 and 2004. Many of the online comments about Doveland include the detail that it was inhabited by mostly military personnel and their families during the construction of this antenna array. This has led many people to speculate that maybe people just left the town once Project Sanguine was canceled. And being a military-based town, it simply faded out of people's minds. Other people, however, believe that Project Sanguine was, in fact, completed, and somehow it caused Doveland's disappearance. Maybe the government did away with the town and everyone in it, or some people think it may have fallen into a completely other dimension. One interesting point is that you can find t-shirts and other items like mugs claiming to be Doveland tourist merchandise on the internet, but these are likely items that have been created as a result of interested people researching this story. So, was Doveland, Wisconsin a real town that faded away, as many small towns do, when the economy took a turn for the worse? Or was the town wiped out in an attempt to hide the fact that it ever existed? Or was Doveland, Wisconsin an imagined town that was made up like so many other creepypasta stories and urban legends? What do you think? Welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories. Are you ready for a sinister story? Because this one is a doozy. So lock your doors, turn on the fireplace, cuddle up, and cozy down. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of the diabolical Dolly Öesterreich and her secrets in the attic. August 22nd, 1922 seemed like a normal end to a late summer night. However, at the home of the Öesterreich family, it was anything but normal, and the day ended with neighbors hearing a gunshot followed by a scream. What was all the commotion, and who was in distress? Things like this don't happen in a small Wisconsin neighborhood, except sometimes they do. Before we get into today's story, I have a favor to ask. Have you subscribed to my YouTube channel yet? If not, go ahead and do that. By subscribing, you'll get access to lots of daily videos and true crime content, and we really appreciate your help in growing the show. Now, let's get into the story. Born in 1880, Walburga Korschel, also known as Dolly, was a German immigrant whose family settled in the rural Midwestern state of Wisconsin. At an early age, Dolly was hired to work at the textile factory owned by Fred Öesterreich. During Dolly's time at the textile mill, she was well known by her fellow coworkers. Dolly was an attractive young lady whom others doted on frequently. She was friendly and fun to be around, which attracted people to her. Dolly quickly caught the attention of Fred Öesterreich. Fred was a very wealthy man, but he was also known for his stubbornness and for being bullheaded. Fred was difficult to get along with and very set in his ways. Nevertheless, Dolly liked Fred, and the two married when Dolly was just 17 years old. Fred and Dolly's relationship appeared to be great on the outside until the unexpected death of their only child. This tragedy seemed to tear the two apart. Fred began to drink heavily and work extra long hours to ease his pain, and the marriage began to disintegrate. And while Fred turned to alcohol, Dolly turned to another vice: sex. Fred was an overworked husband who didn't have much time to take care of things around the house or to work on projects when those needed to be done. In the short amount of time when he was home, his time was spent drinking, and little attention was paid to Dolly and her needs. Dolly was a homemaker with a love of sewing. She was always on her sewing machine until one day it needed some repairs. And while the busy Fred was not able to fix it himself, he arranged for a repairman to come to the house to fix it. On Dolly's doorstep arrived a 17-year-old boy by the name of Otto Sanhuber. Otto had worked at the textile factory and was known to be pretty handy with sewing machines. The scandalous 33-year-old Dolly answered the door wearing a silk robe, tights, heavy perfume, and nothing else. This startled the teenage boy, but Otto nervously still entered the house and began making the needed repairs. You can imagine what happened between Dolly and Otto behind those closed doors that day, and this would be just the first of many of their romantic encounters. Dolly's marriage to Fred made her a very wealthy woman, but wealth alone did not bring Dolly satisfaction. She craved romance and attention. She had a strong sexual appetite that was not being fulfilled by her husband. So Dolly and Otto would meet frequently in the Öesterreich's home, as well as Otto's boarding house and nearby motels. The continual appearance of Otto at the Öesterreich's home had gained attention of the townspeople, especially the neighbors, who eventually notified Mr. Öesterreich. Dolly would always explain to others that Otto was just her vagabond brother who was staying with the family for a while. But there's one thing about small towns: people like to talk. Dolly knew she had to come up with a good story as to why the neighbors kept seeing this teenage boy constantly at their house, because obviously they were skeptical about Otto being her vagabond brother. When Fred approached Dolly with his suspicions, the quick-witted Dolly told Fred that the boy in question was someone trying to sell her something, and that he just kept coming back. She told Fred that she believed she had the problem resolved and that he would no longer be returning to the house. But now, Dolly knew she had to quickly think of a solution to prevent the townspeople from continuing to gossip about her interactions with Otto, while still being able to find a way to keep Otto in her life. Her clever plan was to hide Otto in the attic. To her, this seemed like a brilliant idea, and as crazy as it may sound to us, she was kind of right. Otto didn't have many friends, and he was not close to his family, so it wouldn't attract a lot of attention if he just went missing. So while Fred was away, Dolly and Otto would play. Dolly's libido kept her and Otto very busy. She and Otto would meet nearly 8 times a day. For 5 years, Otto would quietly live in the Österreich's attic of their Wisconsin home, only coming down to service Dolly while Fred was gone. When he was in the attic, he would silently read and also enjoy writing pulp fiction stories. Dolly furnished the attic with items for Otto to stay comfortable while he was up there. There were a few occasions that Fred had almost caught the two in the act, but for the most part, he was oblivious to the fact that there was a young man living in the attic. Anytime a noise was made or a shadow passed, Dolly would comfort Fred by stating, "You're just working too hard, and it's causing you to see and hear things." Regardless of how well they had been keeping their sexual affair a secret, it was only a matter of time before a wrench was thrown into their routine. In 1918, Fred decided it was time to move, and the place he settled on was Lafayette Park Place in Los Angeles, California, a very long way from Wisconsin. Dolly was not thrilled about the move, but she agreed as long as she could select their new residence herself. The purpose of the move was to allow the couple a fresh start and to give Fred the opportunity to launch a new company in the area. Dolly made her new home demands very clear, and one of the items that was a must in the new home was an attic. After several searches, Dolly finally found a home that had an attic, and that was not an easy feat. In hopes of continuing her affair with Otto, Dolly hatched a plan to have Otto move into the house before Fred and Dolly arrived. For 4 more years, Otto would spend his days living in the Österreich's attic and having sex with Dolly multiple times a day. That is, until August 22nd, 1922. On this night, Dolly and husband Fred had a terrible fight, one that Otto could hear loud and clear from his perch in the attic. It was so loud, in fact, that Otto thought Dolly might be in danger. He immediately dropped down from the attic and appeared with 2 guns. Right away, Fred recognized Otto as a previous employee of his from the textile factory, and the two went into a fighting rage. They tussled for quite a while until suddenly shots went off and Fred was hit 3 times. Sadly, Fred instantly passed away from the gunshot wounds. Otto thought fast and came up with a scheme to disguise what really happened. He ordered Dolly into the closet and proceeded to lock the door behind her. Otto took the closet keys and the guns with him to the attic. Neighbors surely would have heard the shots fire, and the police would be arriving in no time. The 2 lovers thought it would be very difficult to prove that Dolly could be responsible for Fred's death if she was locked in the closet. When police arrived on the scene, they were alerted to screaming coming from the closet. The police officers came to Dolly's rescue, but soon the questions started as to what happened. Dolly started to tell her story of the events that occurred that night. She told police that there was a robbery in the house. She said that the robbers shot Fred, stole several expensive items, including a posh diamond watch. Dolly claimed that the robbers then locked her in the closet and made their escape. The police were, of course, skeptical of Dolly's story, but they couldn't explain how she would be able to lock herself in the closet. That part of the story did not add up, but of course, they didn't know that there was another accomplice living up in the attic. Even though they were skeptical, they did not press any charges against Dolly, and she was released. After Fred's murder, Dolly took up residence in a new home with a new attic. Her life would not have to be a secret any longer, and she would be able to have her young lover, Otto, live with her. But that is not what happened. Dolly was still not satisfied with a normal life with just one man. Dolly forced Otto back into the attic while bringing multiple lovers in and out of her new home. She did buy Otto a typewriter to keep in the attic with him so that he could continue writing his pulp fiction stories, and Otto stayed content with being Dolly's attic love slave. Not long after moving, though, Dolly started dating her defense attorney, Herman Shapiro. As she began to feel more comfortable around Herman, she let her guard down and let several comments slip that started to raise some red flags. Dolly began to show Herman quite a bit of affection, and she gifted him with many expensive items, one being a luxurious diamond watch. Herman immediately recognized the watch as belonging to Fred Öesterreich. After questioning Dolly about the watch and how she obtained it, Dolly explained that she had just found it under a seat cushion. She claimed she just didn't think this piece of information was important enough to notify police about, so she never mentioned it to anyone but Herman. But being a man of integrity, Herman gave the diamond watch to police. This information was leaked to the press, which triggered two other individuals to come forward. J.E. Farber, a neighbor of Dolly's, and Roy Klum, a lover of Dolly's, came forward stating that Dolly had provided each of them with pistols to dispose of quickly. These were the same caliber pistols that Fred was murdered with. The investigators and prosecuting attorneys believed there was a connection. Not only did they have the testimony of Mr. Farber and Mr. Klum, but they also had the diamond watch that Herman gave them. After presenting their evidence, it was enough to arrest Dolly for Fred's murder in 1923. Even though Dolly was arrested, police were still trying to explain the mystery of how she ended up locked in a closet. Since they were unable to do that, eventually she was released. The entire time Dolly was in jail, Otto was in the attic of the empty house, fending for himself. Feeling guilty, Dolly notified Herman that her vagabond brother was in her attic and begged that he checked on Otto and provide him with groceries. When Herman tapped on the ceiling to alert Otto to come down, Herman was shocked to see the state that Otto was in. It was in this moment that the truth would start to unravel. Otto had not really had a conversation with anyone, other than occasionally Dolly, in over 10 years, so he was ecstatic to have another person to communicate with. He informed Herman that he was Dolly's sex slave for 10 years and that he had been made to keep their arrangement quiet. Herman, upset at finding out about Dolly's adultery, insisted that Otto leave at once. Otto fled the state and moved to Canada. After Dolly's release, she and Herman moved in together and their relationship lasted 7 more years. But after it ended, Herman notified the police of what he knew regarding Fred's death. A second warrant was issued for Dolly, and she was arrested again, but this time it was for the conspiracy of Fred's murder. Otto was also brought back and charged. Otto became known as Batman after admitting to living in the Öesterreich's attic for an entire decade. He was found guilty of murder, but luckily for Otto, the statute of limitations had been exhausted, and he was able to walk out of the courtroom as a free man. Dolly was also charged, but there were some concerns with the evidence, which resulted in a hung jury. So she was also able to walk away scot-free. Otto seemed to live a very quiet life after this was all over. He changed his name to Walter Klein, and records show him passing away in 1948 at the age of 60. Dolly ended up remarrying and spending nearly 30 years with her final partner until her 1961 death at the age of 80. If you ever hear anything in the attic and your spouse is telling you you're crazy, I suggest you look for yourself. You never know what secrets might be hiding up there. A very special thank you to Jamie Hunsaker Gibbs for writing and submitting tonight's true crime sleep story. Until next time, good night, sleep tight, and don't let the monsters bite. Hello and welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories, where you can settle in with a good true crime tale while drifting off into a safe and sleepy slumber. Maybe you want to sip on a cup of hot tea, grab a warm fleece blanket, or cozy up by the fire. Whatever you decide to do, just make sure you're comfortable and ready for relaxation. I'm your host, Kelly Behrens-Brink, and before we get started tonight, I want to remind you that as a Patreon member, you'll get even more sinister, sleepy content because you get multiple versions of each and every true crime sleep story. Patrons will have access to an ad-free version so you can really relax without the distraction of advertisements, as well as a version with and without music. Some people really enjoy the music and some people prefer it without, but patrons can have it all. You'll also have a video version, so there's a lot of content there in your membership and you're supporting the show. You can go to patreon.com/truecrimesleepstories to sign up. And now it's time to get comfy because I'm going to tell you a bedtime story. Usually people connect witches to Salem, Massachusetts, but for this particular case, the witches were in Springfield, New Jersey. It all started in 1972 when a dog brought home a decomposed forearm to its owner. This prompted a police search, and a body was soon found afterwards atop a cliff in Springfield. The body was identified as Jeannette DePalma, a 16-year-old who had gone missing 6 weeks prior. Immediately, rumors began spreading as to the cause of her death. The hill where she was discovered was covered with occult symbols, and many believed her body was placed on a makeshift altar. Many locals, even some police officers, blame a coven of witches who they say used DePalma for a human sacrifice. Because of a flood, much of the case's details have been destroyed. However, some reports from local papers mentioned that police couldn't determine the cause of death due to her badly decomposed body. They had also investigated a homeless man who was a prime suspect, only to find no connection with the killing. As for the occult theory, many believe that DePalma may have provoked a group of Satan-worshipping teens at her high school when she was trying to evangelize them. She was involved with a group who helped drug addicts by finding faith in Christ. The reverend who ran the group theorized that she was selected as a sacrifice to the group because of this. Was she a human sacrifice? Or did these suspicions help hide the real killer? Perhaps no one will ever know. Who exactly was Jeannette DePalma? Jeannette DePalma was an American teenager born in 1956 who is believed to have been murdered sometime on or around August 7th, 1972 in New Jersey. The case, still unsolved, has become a matter of significant controversy due in part to the coverage in Weird New Jersey magazine and in the 2015 book Death on the Devil's Teeth. In 2021, the New York Daily News mentioned that the organization named Justice for Jeannette DePalma is dedicated to keeping her memory alive, and they have fought to shed more light on her case. The organizers are continuing to look for clues even as the case approaches the half-century mark. On August 7th, 2022, Justice for Jeannette held a 50-year prayer vigil on the steps of Springfield Town Hall with Deputy Mayor Chris Weber, Pastor Kevin Brennan, and Edward Salzano in hopes her 50-year-old murder will be solved. And now that we've talked a little bit about Jeannette's life, here are some of the mysterious details of her death. On the afternoon of Monday, August 7th, 1972, 16-year-old Jeannette DePalma left her home on Clearview Road in Springfield Township, Union County, New Jersey, telling her mother that she was going to take a train to a friend's house. When she did not arrive at her friend's house or return later that evening, her parents filed a missing person report with the Springfield Police Department the following day. 6 weeks later, on September 19th, DePalma's remains were found atop a cliff inside a quarry in Springfield after a local dog brought her decomposing right forearm and hand back to its owner. According to several witnesses at the scene, DePalma's skeletal remains were surrounded by a series of strange and possibly occult objects. Descriptions vary, but the most commonly agreed upon account states that the remains were found inside a coffin-shaped perimeter of fallen branches and logs, and inside this perimeter were several small makeshift wooden crosses. Some Springfield residents later claimed that DePalma's remains were found lying on a pentagram surrounded by mutilated animal remains. Law enforcement authorities have denied that this was true. Further controversy was aroused when it was discovered that the body had been found on a cliff known to locals for several decades as the Devil's Teeth. The Springfield Police Department began an investigation of DePalma's death after an autopsy could not reveal a cause of death. Her remains and clothing showed no evidence of bone fractures, bullet wounds, or knife strikes. No drug paraphernalia was found on or around her body. For undisclosed reasons, the coroner suspected that strangulation was the cause of death, leading the Union County Prosecutor's Office to treat the case as an unsolved homicide. The coroner also discovered an unusually high amount of lead in her remains, but no explanation was found for this occurrence either. Early in the investigation, Springfield police received a tip regarding a homeless man living in the woods near the quarry. This man was known to locals simply as Red, and it was alleged that he fled his campsite in the woods shortly after DePalma went missing. While this lead initially looked promising, the Union County Prosecutor's Office ultimately decided that Red had nothing to do with DePalma's death. Investigators continued to attempt to find leads, but due to a lack of tips from the public, along with inconsistent stories told to the police by her family, friends, and peers, the case eventually went cold. Around 2 weeks after the discovery of DePalma's remains, several newspapers, including the Newark Star-Ledger and the New York Daily News, began reporting that she may have been the victim of an occult sacrifice carried out either by Satanists or by a local coven of witches who operated inside nearby Watchung Reservation. This coverage was spurred by reports that the body had been found surrounded by strange objects, and by the theories of James Tate, the pastor of DePalma's family's Assembly of God church. Rumors about the case set off a panic in several Union County communities, which were still recovering from the shock of the John List murders only 10 months earlier. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Weird New Jersey magazine began to report on the decades-old case after receiving several anonymous letters regarding DePalma's death. Editor and co-founder Mark Moran began investigating the case and wrote about many purportedly suspicious details, including the allegation that Springfield police had lost or destroyed the case file. The Springfield Police Department maintains that the file was lost due to flooding caused by Hurricane Floyd in 1999. Others allege that a copy is still secretly on file. Moran eventually teamed up with Weird New Jersey correspondent Jesse P. Pollock to write the book Death on the Devil's Teeth: The Strange Murder That Shocked Suburban New Jersey. Throughout the course of their research, Pollock and Moran discovered several instances of a possible cover-up, connections to other unsolved murders, and previously unknown suspects. Despite rumors and innuendo offered by Springfield police regarding DePalma possibly dying as the result of a drug overdose, no drug paraphernalia was ever found on, near, or around her body, and she was not known by friends or family to have used any recreational or prescription drugs other than occasionally smoking marijuana socially. DePalma's autopsy report makes no mention of the possibility of a drug overdose, and the medical examiner Bernard Ehrenberg went on record stating he suspected strangulation, as he could not rule it out during the autopsy of her remains. Edward Salzano was given a box of documents that contained the FBI crime lab report and medical examiner's report by John Bancy, Jeannette DePalma's nephew, before he died. Salzano sued the Union County Prosecutor's Office to test Jeannette DePalma's clothing for DNA. The FBI report stated that stains were too decomposed for conclusive blood and semen examinations in 1972. But Salzano hopes that with today's DNA testing, a DNA profile can be obtained from the clothing. Justice for Jeannette DePalma is dedicated to keeping her memory alive. The organizers are continuing to look for clues even as the case approaches the half-century mark. Jeannette DePalma's case is mentioned in the book A Long Walk Home, where her case is urged to be changed from suspicious death to homicide. The book mentions similarities between the Jeannette DePalma, Joan Kramer, and Carol Ann Farino killings. In 2022, law enforcement said that there is still local interest to find out what happened to Jeannette. Who killed 16-year-old Jeannette DePalma? Was she the victim of a satanic ritual, or was there a sinister police cover-up involved? Sadly, we may never know. I'm Kelly Barons-Brink, and this has been tonight's True Crime Sleep Story. Good night, sleep tight, and don't let the monsters bite.
Hello, dreamers, and welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories. Little old Peachy here. Peachy Death, if we're being formal, but we're not. You may have seen me around. If you haven't, you will. I am the smile in the moon's face at night. I am the warm embrace of your lover. I am in hurricanes and ice flows and tragedies and lava lamps. I am the perfumed scent in the ether. I am your new neighbor who works at the dress shop. I am a weaver of stories, and I am the voice that will be lulling you into the gentlest repose. Put your birds to bed, fluff up your pillow, and grab your stuffed snowman. Curl up. Get cozy. We're going on a walk. Unspeakable. Dream all you want, for it is all that you have. I slaughter your children, and I must laugh. Living to bring evil, living just to die. I care nothing for you, or how you cry. Unspeakable. In 1986, 20-year-old Kurt Struebing was known for being a boy in a band. By then, he was part of Enemy, a power thrash metal band, but he had been active in the local metal scene since he was a teenager. We've all known him. Most of us have probably been in love with someone like him. Crazy talented, tortured, creative type. Dreamy. Here's looking at you, Eric Glendy. Kurt started his first band with some high school friends in 1983, a project called Night Prowler that released 2 demos, Eat Death and Back for Seconds. You can imagine the intensity. From there, he went on to form Enemy, and by 1986, their first album, Unholy Death, had been released with plans for a follow-up record already in the works. Tragically, that plan would never come to fruition. Unholy Death was filled with fire and brimstone lyrics, songs about hell and death and agony, violence and demons, blood, suffering and slaughter, and the end of days. Very potently dark thoughts that were unfortunately indicative of Kurt's inner turmoil. Struebing was known to struggle severely with drug addiction, which caused him to experience violent hallucinations when under the influence, depending on who you asked. Some close to him would attest to his heavy drug use. Some would staunchly insist the opposite. The agreed-upon fact was, at least, that he was profoundly mentally unstable at this time, and that it seemed to be escalating. His friends said that he had gotten weird. These struggles would forever change the trajectory of his life and those around him as the darkness continued to take hold. On April 7th, 1986, Kurt Struebing claimed to have taken a much higher drug dose than was his usual. He alleged that the unusually high dose of drugs caused him to hallucinate to the point of believing that he was a robot. In his drug-induced state, he began to wonder if his mother, Darlene Struebing, a data processor for Pacific Northwest Bell, might also be a robot. As delusion took over, Kurt found a hatchet and a pair of scissors and proceeded to brutally attack Darlene, cutting open his own mother to see what was inside. Unsurprisingly, not the cogs and mechanisms of a robot. Kurt then called 911, reporting that he had just killed his 53-year-old mother in her home. As he was escorted away in a police car, he unintelligibly tried to explain the events that led up to the murder. In his own words, "It's been a long night. I just got off from reality. Can I still be an artist?" Police demanded to know why he felt compelled to kill his mother, and Kurt replied, "I just got caught up in everything. I couldn't cry. I learned too late that I could be whatever I wanted to be." Whatever he wanted to be. How did we end up here? Struebing's parents were divorced. He was known to not get on well with his father, but he and Darlene never seemed to have any problems. However, there clearly was a problem with Kurt's mental and emotional state at this time. The signs were there, in retrospect, in the weeks leading up to Darlene's murder. Kurt had just cut off his waist-length hair, which was a bold and unexpected move for the thrash metal rocker. His bandmates said that he was acting strangely, insisting that he could read people's minds. He eventually believed that he might be a robot, and that those around him likely were as well. Kurt accused people of stealing from him, of wanting to do him harm. One friend had rented a carpet shampooer for a project they were working on, and without their knowledge, Kurt drank the entire bottle of carpet cleaner, making himself incredibly ill. His reasoning was that he was trying to clean himself out. He stripped naked and walked home. Kurt was arrested and later pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, though even the prosecution had sought a shorter sentence. As written in the Seattle Times, documents indicated that prosecutors and defense attorneys agreed Struebing was mentally ill, although they differed on whether he was criminally insane at the time of the murder. Both had agreed to recommend an 8-year sentence, but the judge instead handed down a 12-year prison term to be served in the mentally ill offenders unit of the Monroe Reformatory. Struebing was released in 1994, and he would resume a fairly normal life, all things considered. He fell back into his beloved music scene, became a trusted friend and doting father, and figurehead in the local metal community. Friends would say that there were two Kurt Struebings, the one they knew before his mother's murder, and the one who emerged after nearly a decade of incarceration, a changed man who seemed to have found a light in the darkness. That is, until his sudden death in 2005. At the age of 39, Struebing was sitting in his car at an open but barricaded bridge in Seattle, Washington, waiting for a boat to pass. Suddenly, he drove his Volkswagen Jetta through 2 barriers on the bridge, careening off the edge and plunging to the ground more than 50 feet below. Police investigators and motorists who saw the crash were bewildered as to why Kurt abruptly drove his car off the bridge, seemingly with no rhyme or reason. Loved ones struggled to make sense of it, laying it to rest as being a horrible accident. What was Kurt's reality in those final moments? We'll never truly know. Sometimes, I think, the darkness comes back to haunt us. Unspeakable, hiding in the shadows, creeping up on you. Voices from hell tell me just what to do. I split your skull to watch the blood run. Everything's black with death. No more sun. Unspeakable. If you're still here, thank you kindly for listening to this week's episode of True Crime Sleep Stories and for letting old Peachy sprinkle some sand in your eyes. Hope you're very sleepy and only a little creepy. See you in your dreams.
Hello, friend. I'm Shane Waters, the host of Foul Play Crime Series. But tonight, just call me Mr. Sandman. I have a terrible and brutal murder story for you to relax and fall asleep to. But first, I want you to close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. Yes, just like that. Don't worry, no stranglers are around tonight. I'm here with you, and you're safe. Keep taking deep breaths. All your worries are gone now. And it's just you, me, and this murder makes 3. All right, let's get into it. In the afternoon of Friday, September 18th, 4 bodies were found in a home on First Avenue in Farmville, Virginia. Every victim had been killed in such a brutal manner that those who saw the crime scene referred to the setting as that of a brutal slaughterhouse. Soon enough, it was noted that something was missing from the home. A visitor, an aspiring horrorcore artist named Richard McCorsky. Richard McCorsky III was born on December 23, 1988, and grew up in Hayward, California, before moving to Castro Valley. Following his parents' separation in summer 2009, Richard lived together with his father and sister, Sarah. The McCorskys were not an unhappy family, but not that close-knitted either. As Sarah said, "We were not a Leave It to Beaver type of family. We each had our own space and did our own thing." Richard, however, had a little hard time finding his place in the world. He was known to be meek and an insecure kid who was constantly bullied for his weight and red hair at school. Being picked on nonstop eventually broke Richard's confidence. Still, According to his sister, Richard was a mild-mannered and kind-hearted person who never fought back or even said anything unless he was provoked enough. Richard attended 2 different high schools, but in the end, he dropped out permanently. School was just not Richard's place, as Sarah said. We both fell into the wrong crowd, but high school was just uncomfortable for Sammy. He was just unhappy. He could not do it. Richard, who had very few friends, spent most of his time at home by himself. The internet, and especially the social networking site MySpace, became his escape from reality in addition to making music. Online, Richard built himself a second persona, portraying himself as an aspiring horrorcore rapper, Psycho Sam. Richard would spend hours and hours recording in his room and working on creating a more tough-sounding image for himself. Psycho Sam was everything Richard could not be in real life, confident and successful, even though his sister said Psycho Sam was just a stage name and not an alter ego. Richard clearly hid behind his online persona, and as Psycho Sam, Richard eventually met a girl, 16-year-old Emma Niederbach, on MySpace. Emma, who was described as a beautiful, sweet, and smart young woman, lived in Farmville, Virginia, with her mother Deborah. She saw herself as something of a goth, wore black, dyed her hair pink, and was known on MySpace by the nickname Ragdoll. Emma was also heavily into horrorcore, and for that reason, she was excited to be in contact with an artist within the genre, Psycho Sam. The two began talking pretty much every day. Not before long, Richard started to think that Emma was his online and long-distance girlfriend. He thought Emma was smart and cute, and of course, loved how she looked up to him as a horrorcore rapper. However, Emma saw the situation a little bit differently. To her, Richard was nothing more than a close friend, even though she often flirted with him. While Richard called her his girlfriend, Emma never used the word boyfriend around him and was talking with other people in addition to Richard. It seems that a great amount of miscommunication eventually led to a disaster. After over a year of having some kind of relationship online, Richard and Emma planned to meet in person. In September 2009, there was a horrorcore music festival being held in Southgate, Michigan, called Strictly for the Wicked. Deborah had agreed to let Emma's friends, 18-year-old Melanie Wells and Richard, stay at their house in Farmville for the concert week. However, as soon as Richard's plane landed in Virginia on September 12th, things went south. While Richard had been overly excited to see his girlfriend, it was immediately clear Emma did not feel the same way. Straight after she laid her eyes on Psycho Sam, she pulled back. She was not attracted to Richard, who was nothing like his online persona. Compared to his MySpace photos, he looked like a different person. He appeared far younger than 20 years old and was quite short and disappeared within his oversized sweatshirt. On top of that, Richard's personality came across as rather immature, not like his online personality. If Emma ever had feelings towards Richard, all of them now disappeared. Obviously, Richard felt the rejection. Once again, he was not accepted in his life, but this time it hit harder than ever before. Richard had really thought he had something great going on with Emma. Despite the not-so-good start, Deborah drove the two teenage girls and Richard to the concert in Michigan, which takes around 10 hours with no stops. You can only imagine how awkward the drive must have been, but it was nothing compared to what happened at the festival. While Richard had hoped that once they arrived at Strictly for the Wicked, things would have taken a turn for the better, as he and Emma would both be in their element, and the music would help set the vibe. However, that is not what happened. Instead, Emma openly flirted with other guys and artists at the festival, acting like Richard was not present. When the trio returned to Emma's house the next day, Richard felt horrible. His flight home would not depart for several days, so he was stuck in the home of a girl who did not want to have anything to do with him. Every passing minute, the anger inside Richard grew stronger and stronger until it exploded. At 2:43 a.m. on Monday, September 14th, Melanie posted on her MySpace page, "SFTW was fucking amazing. Back in Virginia now. Be back in West Virginia on Wednesday. I miss everyone." After that, she went quiet. In the next couple of days, Melanie's family and friends did not hear from her at all, which was highly unusual. Then on September 16th, Melanie was supposed to return home, but she did not. After multiple failed attempts to contact their daughter, Melanie's father Thomas decided to drive 200 miles from Inwood to Farmville. However, as he arrived at the Niederbrock home, nobody answered the door. Thomas sat inside his car for a long time, hoping that the women were just out and he would see them return home. But as hours kept passing, Thomas did not have any other option than return home empty-handed. Upon his return, Melanie's mother, Kathleen, began calling Emma's house. She called and called and called, but nobody answered. Kathleen then came across the phone number of Andre Smith, the owner of Serial Killin' Records that organized the Strictly for the Wicked festival. She decided to give him a call, and Andreas did answer, but he could only tell he had seen Melanie, Emma, and Richard at the festival. What they had done afterward, Andreas did not know. Unsure what else to do, Kathleen again called Emma's home, and this time, Richard answered the phone. But as he failed to give her a straight answer where her daughter was, Kathleen knew something was not right, and so she contacted Virginia State Police, who agreed to go to the Niederbrock home at 505 First Avenue on September 17th to do a welfare check. At the house, they were greeted by Richard Mikrowski. Apparently, Richard told the officers that Emma, Melanie, and Deborah were at the movies. For reasons unknown, the police did not question him more than that, which is strange, assuming that Kathleen had told them how serious the situation was. Frustrated that the welfare check had turned up nothing, Kathleen called Emma's father Mark, who lived close by, and asked him to go to the house to check on the girls. Mark promised to do so, but Kathleen never heard back from him. At this point, Kathleen must have felt quite hopeless already, but she needed answers, and so she called the police again and convinced them to return to the house at 505 First Avenue. Finally, as the officers then entered the home around 3:10 p.m. through the unlocked front door, they were faced with the unmistakable stench of death and a gruesome scene. Emma, Melanie, Deborah, and Mark had all been bludgeoned to death. The scene was described by police as being so horrifying they were not willing to give any further details. But we do know that 3 bodies were found in Emma's bedroom downstairs, and one of the bodies were discovered in a room upstairs. After going through the home and checking the social media accounts of the victims, it did not take the investigators long to figure out that Richard Mikrowski had been the one present at home during the welfare check. So where was he now? Richard was on the run. He had stolen Mark's car earlier that day, but got it stuck in a ditch at the end of the driveway. A tow truck and a deputy had shown up, and Richard was given a ticket for driving without a license, but as the 4 bodies had not yet been found, and nobody knew he was a murder suspect, Richard was then let go. Next, he caught a cab to Richmond International Airport, where he planned to spend the night before catching a flight back to California. However, Richard never made it to the plane, as the police were able to trace his movements and located him on the morning of September 19th at the airport, sleeping in the baggage claim. Reportedly, as Richard was led away by the officers, he said to a reporter who asked him why he had done what he did, he said, Jesus made me do it. On October 19, 2009, Richard was charged with 6 counts of capital murder, 1 for each of his 4 victims, as well as capital murder for murdering multiple people within 3 years. As the evidence against him was overwhelming, Richard's defense attorney told him straight away to take a plea deal to avoid a trial, and with that, the death penalty. And so he did. On September 20th, 2010, Richard Bukowski pleaded guilty to 2 counts of capital murder and 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was given 4 life sentences and is serving his sentence at Wallen Ridge State Prison in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. While Richard has never really given an explanation for his actions and was just smirking as he exited the courtroom, attorney Jim Ennis speculated what might have happened, saying, "I think he had a certain expectation of the relationship with Emma Niederbrock. What was it going to be like after a year on the computer? And it did not turn out to be what he imagined it was going to be like." It definitely seems like a fragile mind had gotten one last hit and fell apart. According to his lawyer, Richard had been drinking and smoking marijuana at the time of the murders and felt enraged due to Emma's rejection. At some point in the early hours of September 15th, that anger had boiled over, and Richard had killed Melanie, Emma, and Deborah while they slept in their beds with a ball-peen hammer. He had then sat in the house with 3 dead bodies through the welfare check and until Mark came up to the house and killed him too. After Richard's arrest and his music career became public, some have attempted to blame horrorcore and juggalo subcultures that idolizes violence and song lyrics for the brutal murders to make sense of such horrifying crime. But the truth is, violent music does not make a person violent. The blame lay only on the shoulders of Richard Bukowski and no one else. Good night.
Hello, and welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories. I am your guest host, Courtney.
And I am also your guest host, Amanda. And we are both from A Nefarious Nightmare.
Now, settle in and get cozy, because we are about to tell you a bedtime story. Despite the word nightmare in our name, we want to just lull you to sleep. Off to dreamland, get all comfy and cozy in your bed. Make sure you keep the AC or heat to a comfortable temperature, just to promote sleepiness. Now we do hope you listen though, because this story does have a moral to it.
If you find that our nefarious story will indeed give you nightmares, well, don't say we didn't warn you. This is where I normally recommend our hot cocoa, hot tea, hot toddy, or really any beverage that warms the soul. But, well, we are talking about the Papin sisters today, so maybe double down on those things. Of course, maybe avoid melatonin because it tends to exacerbate nightmares in some folks. And if you need a hug and a reassuring word to help you drift off to sleep, you can email Courtney at anefariousnightmare@gmail.com.
I don't know why Amanda didn't include herself, but that's alright. I'm happy to be your friend in this trying time. Also, please note that we are on Twitter at @ANefarious_pod, on Instagram at @NefariousNightmarePod, and searchable by A Nefarious Nightmare pretty much everywhere else. Now bundle up, it's time to start this story.
The parents of the Papin sisters were considered evil as they come. The mom apparently cared very little for her children. There was abuse, and while not much is known about Amelia, she was sexually assaulted by her abusive father. She left shortly after that to become a nun in a monastery.
So there are a total of 3 Papin sisters, and all of them have had a rough upbringing. The oldest sister was Amelia, and there's not much else known about her since she didn't participate in any of these crimes. Then came Christine, who was 6.5 years older than the youngest, Leah. Despite their significant age gap, as you all will see, these two were very close. Some have mistaken them to be twins.
Christine and Leah Papin eventually got a job working as domestic servants for a retired lawyer, Renee Lanson, his wife, Leonie, and their grown daughter, Genevieve. The Lanslins lived in a beautiful 2-story townhome in the city of Le Mans on number 6 Rue Boyer. This family was particularly affluent, and outsiders considered them a nice family who treated the sisters well. They ate the same food as the family, lived in a heated room, and were paid the standard wages of the time.
It's been thought, at least by the locals, that the family was very pleased with the job that the sisters did around the home, and the Lancelins were envied by every French upper-class household for having such dedicated and hardworking domestic help. The sisters were coveted by all. Unfortunately, however, things aren't always as they seem on the outside. Now, inside the Lancelin household, the sisters had been treated as though they didn't belong. For example, Renee Lancelin ignored them for the entire 7 years that they worked for him. It was as though they were beneath him.
Instead, any task they had been given was given by the wife, and even at that, it was written. Leonie was a demanding and extremely privileged force around the house, demanding perfection as she routinely performed quote-unquote white glove tests on furniture to confirm that the furniture had been dusted and cleaned correctly. At some point, it has to feel demeaning.
On an eerily dark and extremely stormy day, the mother and daughter were to return home from a shopping trip and go directly to the home of Leonie's brother. Renee planned to meet them there, and the family were not expected home by the sisters until late that evening. The sisters were given orders to run errands, one of which was to pick up an iron from the repair shop. When the iron was plugged into the electrical outlet, it then blew a fuse. They were afraid of what would happen if the mishap were to be found out, but expecting the affluent family to return later, they decided to wait until the morning to try to repair the fuse.
But as luck would have it, the mother and daughter came home early. According to Christine, the mother flew into an intense rage when she was told that the iron was still broken and that the electricity was out. Christine then smashed a pewter jug onto the mother's head. Thwack! Then her daughter started to attack Christine. This is where things get even more violent. Christine has had enough at this point because she allegedly shouted, quote, "I am going to massacre them," end quote.
Leah then rushed down from the attic and attacked the mother. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Smash her head into the ground and tear her eyes out, Christine would scream. Leah is believed to be the impressionable of the two, and of course followed Christine's orders, and proceeded to tear Genevieve's eyes from her face.
Then, since the mother and daughter were now freshly without sight, the sisters grabbed a hammer, a knife, and a pewter pot and struck blows. Thwack, 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 until the mom and daughter fell silent. They then disrobed the bottom half of the two and began cutting into their buttocks and thighs.
Once all of this was said and done, the sisters basted the mother with her own daughter's period blood. The sisters then bathed, locked every door in the house, lit one candle in their room, and waited for the inevitable.
Renee, now concerned when his wife and daughter failed to show up for dinner, returned home with one of his friends. They returned to all the doors locked and the house is pitch black. Renee then contacted the police, who broke into the townhouse. The sisters were found naked in bed together and immediately confessed to the double murder. They claimed that it was self-defense. Christine Papin said, quote, "It was her or us," end quote. And Leah told police, quote, "From now on, I am deaf and dumb," end quote.
This case attracted a ton of attention from intellectuals of the time. They argued that the murders were the manifestation of the class struggle. They believed that they were treated poorly, considered their bosses to be mean-spirited, and thus the girls rebelled. This seemed to be reflected in the poor conditions under which the people who worked as servants to the rich lived.
The defense considered the Papins temporarily insane during the time of murder. They used the following examples. They had a cousin who died in an asylum, a grandfather prone to violent attacks of temper, and an uncle who had committed suicide as evidence of a hereditary disposition towards insanity. Psychologists later argued in the aftermath of the trial that the Papin sisters suffered folie à deux, the condition of shared psychosis. This can typically be seen in twins, although it's somewhat rare. The symptoms of the shared psychosis included hearing voices, a sense of persecution, and capability of inciting violence in perceived self-defense against imagined threats, as well as inappropriate expressions of sexuality.
Those with this particular type of paranoia often focus on a matron figure as a persecutor, which would be Madame Lanzelin in this case. In this type of affliction, one half of the pair will often dominate the other, as Christine dominated Leah. Paranoid schizophrenia can be difficult to diagnose, as the paranoid person can appear quite normal, which is how the sisters likely seemed normal and innocent during the trial.
It was ultimately decided that the Papin sisters were of sound mind and therefore seemed guilty. Christine Papin was sentenced to be put to death by guillotine in the public square on September 30th, 1933. Leah Papin was considered an accomplice and was given a lighter sentence of 10 years of hard labor.
Christine waited in the holding cell for her punishment and became unhinged. She tried to claw her own eyes out. She was then put in a straitjacket while her sentence was commuted to life. She then passed away in 1937 as a result of starving herself. Leah, however, was released in 1941 on good behavior. She served a total of 8 years. She then went on to reside with her mother and lived a long and quiet life under anonymity.
The Papin sisters were thought to be treated as an appalling nature, as they were considered to be servants of a wealthy French family. This story was a vital mark in French history and woke people up to the notion of class struggle. On February 2nd of 1933, Christine and Leah Papin committed one of the most horrific murders in France's history. Prominent intellectuals like Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Jeannette held up the crime as an example of class warfare.
The Papin sisters will live infamously, as their crimes and their life story are both horrific and fascinating. These two ripped out the eyes of their victims, which rendered their faces unrecognizable, and they also mutilated their genitals. Their victims were the affluent family that employed them, Leonie and Genevieve Lanzelin. These two were mother and daughter, respectively. As you drift off to sleep, know the moral of this story. Treat those who serve you well, because you never know if a turkey baster is hanging around somewhere. I'm Courtney Fenner.
And I'm Amanda Cronin, and this has been tonight's True Crime Sleep Story.
Be sure to find a nefarious nightmare wherever you get podcasts. Good night.
Sleep tight, and don't let the monsters bite.